And he said, "What is this? And why did my grandfather want me to bring it to you?" And I told him what it was and said that yod is a Hebrew word that means hand. And I said, "Let me show you how we use it." So we went into the synagogue and I unrolled the Torah and I gave him the yod and put my hand on his. And I said, "Let's read a little bit of the Torah together because this is your heritage. Your grandfather wanted you to know that your family was once Jewish."
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Famoso, and this is another episode of Golda's Girls. My co-host for today is Rachel Rappaport, and we have a very interesting guest, as usual, but this one is very special, Rabbi Barbara Aiello.
First, I want to welcome you, Rabbi Barbara. I think it's wonderful to meet you after being Facebook friends for a number of years, and to actually meet you. So it's an honor to have you with us today. And I want to ask you, what inspired you to move to Italy and start a synagogue?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Rochelle, for the opportunity to be part of Golda's Girls. It's very exciting for me to share my story with both of you and with all of your listeners. I ended up in Italy because I'm Italian and an Italian American, the first one in my family born in the United States. And people often ask me why the synagogue is in this little mountain village. It's because it's where my father was born and grew up. And I came back home to my roots. My father was a liberator of the Buchenwald death camp, and it changed his life actually. Before he passed away, he encouraged me to do something for the lost Jewish people of southern Italy, of the region of Calabria, and where we are right now. And back in the day, I said, "Okay, Daddy, I'll do something." I had no idea what I would do, but I later became a rabbi and later came here with a small grant to establish the synagogue and to specifically attract as you mentioned, the bnei anusim, the phrase in Hebrew that means the descendants of the forced ones, the children or the descendants of the forced ones, meaning those who were forced to give up their Judaism and accept under duress Christian baptism. And so our congregation is made up of people who are returning to reclaim their Jewish roots.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think a lot of Italian people have Jewish genes, like from 2000 years ago already. It started with the expel of Jews from what we say Israel. So that's so interesting.
From Judea, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And there are historians here in this area and throughout Italy who believe that prior to the Inquisition, the expulsion from Spain and the persecution of the Jews through the Mediterranean, prior to the Inquisition, 50% of the population here in South Italy was once Jewish. And there are many, many Italian Americans and Italian Canadians and people with Italian heritage throughout the world who've always felt Jewish.
Yeah.
And I get lots of emails. People say to me, I've always felt Jewish. I hope you don't think I'm crazy." And I say, "Of course not. You're just one of hundreds who contact me, who continue to contact me throughout the years." And we do a surname research. We have a program where we look at surnames like my own, and we trace those surnames back to Spain if we can. And that often is indicative of Jewish heritage. When a surname traveled from Spain to Portugal to the Iberian Peninsula to Sicily to the toe of the boot, and then up here in the mountains, or as I like to say, the instep of the Italian boot.
So interesting. I regularly hear from Israelis that if they travel through Europe, they feel mostly at home in Italy with Italian people, that the commonality is really everywhere. Yeah.
Not a coincidence. Not a
No, no,
coincidence.
no.
Hmm.
I want to mention something. My last name, Rappaport, um, there's a connection to Mantova. There was, I think in about the 1500s, there was a rabbi named Rappe, and in Mantova. And then in Portugal at the same time, in Porto, there was a rabbi named Porto. Apparently, their children married one another. They became Rappaport. And so, so it's funny, but because whenever I'm in Italy, I feel like I belong there. I feel like it's home.
Yes, yes, and it's interesting that of the several hundred people who have contacted me over the years and are through our cultural center and through our we're a three-person staff that does research on surnames with primary and secondary sources, and of the several hundreds of people who have contacted us throughout the years, we have never not found a Jewish connection in a surname. And I find that absolutely fascinating, mainly because, as you said, you feel that pull toward Italy. You feel that connection. And I feel people wouldn't be contacting us to study their surnames to see if there is a Jewish connection if they didn't feel it inside, if there wasn't that pull of the emotional DNA. And so we have a lot of people that have made we say people can discover and embrace their Jewish roots. So discovering may mean you just want to know why you've always felt like you didn't quite fit in with Italian Catholic culture. And you want to know where you came from. Knowing one's history is very important. And I'm sure, Carla, you know that as a psychologist, having a sense of where you come from and who you came from as well. And and uh, and then we also offer anyone who discovers their Jewish roots to embrace their roots, and they can do that through Jewish study, through formal conversion. And we've had over the years, I think we're up now to about 57 people who have made conversion, and are actively involved in Jewish communities now, which is a wonderful thing.
That is so wonderful. It's what I heard you say. I felt myself often in the Netherlands, the odd one out. And I felt different. And I said always, I'm born in the wrong country. That's how I blamed it for. I felt my way of being was different. And I don't know, it's that feeling when I came first to Israel, then I was like, yes, it felt like homecoming. But I have also a connection with Portugal and Spain in a way, and Italy for this matter. That's wonderful.
Well, my own surname started out as El Al, like the airlines, but meaning to God, to God. I'm going from Judea to Spain, where it was Ayala with the Y or the Ypsilon, which the letter we do not have in Italian. So then to Portugal with what we call E lungo, which Americans would call J, and then finally to Sicily, and then eventually to the toe of the boot of mainland Italy, where it became Aiello, Aiello. And so that's just one example of the kind of work that we do. Many times people will ask us, well, does that indicate that I am Jewish? I said, well, it indicates we don't do a bloodline. We're not genealogists, but but back in the day of, you mentioned the 1500s, prior to the Inquisition, when the expulsion happened, I should say, when Jews were either forced to leave to accept Christian conversion or leave Spain, those who left at a time when very few people traveled. All of your wealth was tied up in your property. You had a house, and then your children grew up, and you built onto that house, and then those grandchildren grew up, and you built onto the house again. And so, for the most part, these surnames wouldn't travel capriciously. That would generally indicate being forced out. my husband's surname is Mascaro, which in Spain was Mascaro, with the accent on the O. And Mascaro was a colleague of Spinoza. There was a rabbinic colleague of Spinoza from Catalonia. And my family in Spain was from Toledo. So we feel that when we see this movement, this migration of the surname, it's a strong indication of Jewish roots.
Wow, that is so
Fascinating history.
Yeah.
And I asked you before we started whether you were related to the late actor Danny Aiello, and you said he was your uncle, your father's brother?
He was his father and my grandfather were brothers.
Oh.
And we were friends over the years. And many people often say, well, was he Jewish? Well, many people were able to acknowledge their Jewish roots, but maintained a strong Catholic tradition. And because Jews don't proselytize, we create a level of comfort for people who discover their Jewish roots and want to stop right there. And I'm really fortunate here in our village of Serrastretta because our priest, Don Gigi Iuliano, understood that from his mother's lineage, the family was once Jewish. And so he brings the catechism classes to the synagogue to learn about the Jewish traditions of our town. And founded by 5 Jewish families, I might mention, and running from a persecution. And we do a lot of things together. We celebrate Hanukkah together because, of course, in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, there is not the book of Maccabees 1 and 2. So where do we find that? In the Catholic Bible. So Don Gigi reads from his Bible, and we teach about Hanukkah via the Talmud. And we do that every year. We also kindle light on almost 50 Hanukkah menorahs, and it's a really beautiful, beautiful holiday.
Yeah, so much light. I have heard lately a rabbi speak about the children that were hidden in Italy that were rescued in the Second World War, right, for the Shoah, and that he asked the Pope to give them back because they were Jewish children, even if their parents were alive or not. And then the Pope seemed to have answered, no, because they are baptized now, so they're Christian. Have you ever heard about it? Have you ever noticed that there are still children that, well, maybe not today, they're not children anymore, but that no, they don't.
Actually, there was one very famous case of a little boy that grew up in a Christian family, was baptized, and the parents survived. And there was a big brouhaha over not returning him to the family. But interestingly enough, my husband was born as an identical twin, and in 1941, and the midwife who delivered the babies wanted to make sure they were baptized because the Nazis were looking for twins. And so she took the babies, the midwife took the babies while my mother-in-law was sleeping to the priest, and the priest refused to baptize them. He said, these are Jewish children, but he did create the document, the birth certificate. And interestingly enough, here's my husband with Jewish roots all the way back to a famous rabbi, to Spinoza, as I said, with a birth certificate that says pure Aryan race.
Oh my God.
But this priest, of course, saved their lives.
Amazing.
So there's, I think, there percentage-wise, in terms of the Holocaust, there were more Jews saved in Italy than any other country, and mainly by the priests and the nuns who took the children into the convents, hid them, had them masquerade as Christian children, and saved their lives.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. All over Europe, those stories are there. Very powerful. Thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what stories did people tell you when you were in Serrastretta the Italians who assumed that they were Catholic. What stories did they tell you about their habits and traditions that made you inform them that they actually had Jewish roots, but they just thought these things were just simple family traditions?
You're exactly right. That's what people thought before I got here, because I'm kind of a strange duck. Being able to speak Italian and have a knowledge of Hebrew. I wish I spoke Hebrew better, but having a good knowledge of Hebrew and able to, and Jewish tradition, and able to point out things where someone will say to me, this is our family tradition. And I'm able to tell them, no, well, it might be your family tradition, but it's your family Jewish tradition. And all established Judaism was wiped out here in the early 1500s, and the churches, the synagogues were taken over and turned into churches. The holy books and documents were burned in the public square, and many people took their traditions underground, and many of them literally. In my own family, my grandmother took her candles for Shabbat and took them into the cantina, and in the dark lit the candles. And even when my father brought her to the United States on the very first Friday night, she gathered her challah, her wine, and her candles, her candelabra and candles, took them downstairs and into the basement. And as she's heading to the door, my father says, "This is America. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave." And she says, "Non sono sicura. You never know." And she continued to light the candles in the canteen in the basement in Pittsburgh for all the rest of her life.
Oh,
But
Wow.
right here, a couple of things I can share with you that were just really remarkable. One has to do with a death. There was a woman on our street named Maria Paletta, and Maria had Alzheimer's, and many times she would her son worked far away, and so he was gone during the day and came home late at night, and she would walk outside and get where she lived, where her house was. And so the women, mostly the women on the street, myself included, would walk her back home. And when she passed away, her son put a manifesto, put a silk sign on this beside the door with a poster announcing her death and announcing that people could come and give their condolences. And I said his name was Samuele, interestingly enough, and Samuel. And I said, "Are you having a Catholic a mass?" And he said, "No, no, we're just having people come to the house." So we all did on the street. He was very open and grateful for all the caring and love we gave to his mother. When I walked in, I I saw all of the mirrors covered in white, all of the pictures covered in white, and little chairs that I would have thought were for children. But actually, these were chairs all throughout the village for mourning, and people sat, of course, on the low chairs. And I said, "Samuela, do you know what these traditions are?" He said, "I know they're strange. They're our family traditions." I said, "Well, they are your Jewish traditions as well." And another experience I had with a young man named Luca, and Luca came knocking at my door one day, and he said, "I'd like to speak to the rabbi." I said, "Well, you're looking at her." He said, "My grandfather passed away, and before he died, he had me go into his desk drawer, and he told me to take out something. And he said, I have it here in my pocket. And he said, if you ever know of a rabbi or meet a rabbi, take this to the rabbi." So I invited him in, and out of his pocket, he took a hand-carved yod, the pointer that we use when we're reading the Torah. And it was made of wood, of chestnut wood, which are the chestnut trees here in southern Italy, and shaped like the little hand with the finger at the end. And he said, "What is this? And why did my grandfather want me to bring it to you?" And I told him what it was and said that yod is a Hebrew word that means hand. And I said, let me show you how we use it. So we went into the synagogue and I unrolled the Torah and I gave him the yod and put my hand on his. And I said, let's read a little bit of the Torah together because this is your heritage. Your grandfather wanted you to know that your family was once Jewish.
Wow, wow.
He react.
Mhm.
What was his reaction when you told him?
A relief because so many people say to me, as Lucas said to me, I've always felt different. We were always different. I always felt different. This is so good to know. Um, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people are not so pleased to find out that their family was Jewish. Going back to our surname research, I had a client who contacted me. She had already engaged our staff to study her surnames. But she said, we're having a family reunion, so I'm wondering if you could do this a little faster." So I spoke to some other clients who were ahead of her, and we worked it out so that I could do her next. And she said, "I'm taking this to the family reunion." I said, "Well, very good." I said, "Why don't you make copies of it and let people see it before you arrive?" She said, "No, no, no, it's going to be a surprise." And I said, "Right, no, well, I don't know about that, but good luck." So wouldn't you know, she went to the reunion and she stood up on a picnic table somewhere in Ohio and she said, "I have an announcement for all of you." And she read some of our report, which was quite extensive, actually. And she said, "Our family was once Jewish." And there was kind of a stunned silence on the part of some of the family members. Others said, "Well, we always knew." But some of the family members weren't so pleased. And one auntie came over to her privately and said, "I never liked Jewish people."
They have a
So it
problem.
was very, very difficult. And then another family left the reunion. And so it's a delicate issue. It's a very delicate issue. Um, but I would say 9 times out of 10, people are really happy to know their Jewish traditions. Most of the time they come to me because someone made a deathbed confession, which happened here one time, and a very elderly woman, almost 100, was about to pass. She asked her daughter to get all of the children and grandchildren to come and come around the bedside, which they did. And she said, as she knew she was about to pass, and she said, "I just want you all to know that I never told you our family was once Jewish." And she died shortly after that.
Was it because she was afraid to say to the family we're Jews because of anti-Semitism, or
For the most part, yes, and it was a kind of a family secret, and the family came to me. I was not present for this disclosure, but the family came to me and said, "We're Jewish. What do we do?" And of course, because as you mentioned in my bio, we're open and welcoming to Jews of all backgrounds, including those who have lost Jewish roots. I said, "Come to the synagogue. We'll let you know. We'll show you what the
Wow.
Jewish traditions are." But my father was studying to become bar mitzvah, which he never did because never did have a ceremony because the family left the first time before that could happen. And my father never knew the surname of his teacher. He went to a Bible teacher in a nearby town twice a week, and he only knew the teacher as maestro, as teacher, and master, and the teacher never wanted to disclose his surname. And we also find here in many of the houses, especially, there are a lot of, I'm sure you know from what you've been reading, a lot of abandoned and derelict houses throughout southern Italy. And many times when there's a door, an entrance door on the street, and then you go inside and there's a courtyard, and then there are some other doors leading to sometimes other apartments or other houses within the cortile, as we say. And on the on the tile, on the ceramic tile or the cement, there will be a Magen David, a Star of David. And it has gotten to the point now that when people are renovating houses or sometimes tearing some of the derelict houses down, when they find a Magen David, they call me, and I come and photograph it. But they're all throughout the mountains here. But
That's
people were
fascinating.
really, really careful not to have a mezuzah on the door, for example, but to
Yeah.
have a star in the courtyard.
Wow, that is so fascinating. What brought you to Italy to be a rabbi there?
Well, this is the village where my father grew up.
Yeah.
And my it was my before my father died, he talked often about the lost Jewish traditions of southern Italy. And we are the first Jews in the diaspora and the only Jews that went somewhere voluntarily. And when did all this happen? This happened at the time of the Maccabees, the Hanukkah story, 300 so years BCE. And when the Jews were losing the battle, they sent out a scouting party to look for mercenary soldiers that they could pay to fight. And of course, they left a hot and dry climate, and they had no GPS, so they're rowing their little boats to what is the toe of the boot, and they see the mist rising from what is the town of Reggio Calabria today, and they exclaim, "Ai Talia," Ai in Hebrew meaning island, Tal being dew, Dew, Yah, one of the names of God in Psalm 64 and other places. And so it was and so they loved the climate, they liked what they saw, and they stayed. They never went back. And it was the Jews who named Italy, Italia.
Oh,
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
And your
that's
father,
interesting. I never knew that.
yeah, that's the story. Yeah, I know it's a long time ago. But your
Mhm.
father, as an American soldier, he liberated not Dachau, Buchenwald.
Buchenwald. Yes, he did. Yes, he was here in Italy with partisans, the resistance, and because of his language skills, he was able to coordinate communications between resistance groups in France and Germany and Italy, and then was with the became a citizen on the battlefield, and uh, and and uh, um, and so continued with the American Army also through the Marshall Plan after the end of the war.
That's so fascinating. What made you decide to become a rabbi? Because as you shared before, you were first psychologist. How?
I was also a professional puppeteer, and I created some puppets called the Kids on the Block to teach children to accept and appreciate disability and difference. And um, and many people ask me how I became a rabbi, and I think it's because my parents were involved, and when they came to the United States, everything was so different, and the only thing that was familiar was the synagogue. And so they found a little Sephardic synagogue in Pittsburgh, a little community made up of Italians, Jews, Spanish, Portuguese, Turkish, and Greek, and this little Sephardic group. And their synagogue was actually a private home that was renovated, and the gallery for the women was upstairs. It was up above looking down. So I became a rabbi like this, looking down. My father sang in the synagogue. He was not a cantor, but he had a good voice, and actually he wanted to be an actor. He was studying to be an actor in Germany when the war broke out. And he later became a musician. And and I always felt drawn to the tradition. And I remember seeing men, of course, because this was an Orthodox synagogue, seeing men carrying the Torah, and it looked like a ballet to me. And I thought I would like to be a rabbi one day, which was unusual because there were no women rabbis then. I was born in 1947. This was the 60s, and there were still no women rabbis till the early 70s. And but I always had it in my mind that I wanted to do it. And I was fortunate because I found a small seminary called Rabbinical Seminary International. And we were taught how to be kind of a one-person operation, how to run the services, how to sing, how to put a board together, how to make a school, how to do a budget, and how to fundraise. And it
Is
was
that all?
wonderful. But that was very important, very important. And the seminary was committed to taking students who were making the rabbinate a second career. And I was 47 years old when I went to rabbinical school, and I was 51 when I was ordained, and I'm 78 now. Still
Wow,
still
mazel
working.
tov. Fantastic.
That's great.
Fantastic. Did you go straight to Italy, or you also had a congregation in America before?
I did. I was a student rabbi in Fort Lauderdale
Ah,
with Rabbi Larry Weiner of blessed memory, and I remember complaining about the traffic. Of course, that was a long time ago. I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
it's
it's
worse
don't you
now.
now?
much worse.
And Rabbi Weiner said there's a job opening in Bradenton, Florida, on the West Coast, and I said, "Oh, I don't know. Florida's so crowded." He said, "Well, I think you'll find it different to be different there." And so I interviewed there, and I was offered the job in Bradenton, and I really liked living on the West Coast of Florida. I was there for 5 years, and then I was hired in Milan to be Italy's first woman rabbi in the first non-Orthodox synagogue in the whole country. There are only 6 today.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so I was there for 2 years, and then I got a small grant from an interfaith foundation family that I had married and officiated for their wedding, and they wanted they felt strongly that there were Jewish roots in southern Italy where the bride's family was from, and so that's how we got started with the synagogue here. In 2006, we expanded in 2014, and now we have a study room and a small museum and a sanctuary.
Yes.
So how many congregants are there? And are
We
the
have
congregants
we
members?
have a, yes, we do what's called a Moses membership. Give when your heart is moved, and so whatever you want to give, you give, and that's really how we do it. We do have a not-for-profit and a small foundation, which is very helpful and useful. We maintain the synagogue through destination bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies. Families come to us mostly to show their children that there are places in the world where it's not easy to be Jewish, and destination weddings, which I do, and I do throughout Italy. And we have about 80 members, a deceptive number in a way, because some of them come from as far north as Naples and as far south as Sicily. We have a family with 4 children that come to us from Sicily. So we do Shabbaton weekends where people come on Friday and stay with us until Sunday, and we do several of those throughout the year, in addition to the major Jewish holidays, because it's of course it's a very long drive from Naples to come here for just a Friday night or a Saturday morning.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it gives also connection and helps to grow the community to grow.
Yes, yes.
Is there also a revival of anti-Semitism, like as is seemingly in every European country today? Do you also notice that in Italy, or you don't notice
Oh
it?
yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, uh, anti-Semitic incidents have increased about more than 200%
Oops.
since the October 7th massacre. And I received personally about 200 death threats over Facebook. But the Italian government has been extremely supportive from north to south, and they provide to any synagogue, Jewish day school, of which there are only three, I believe, in all of Italy, and museums, of which there are many more, 24-hour security protection, staffed by the soldiers from the Italian army. And so as we speak, right outside my window and to the left is the gate for the synagogue, and we have two soldiers stationed there, and they're here in six-hour shifts, and they're here night and day, and we're
It-
very grateful.
So is this support because of Georgia Maloney? She seems to be kind of a pro-Israel person.
Very pro-Israel. Yes. Israel and Italy have been very close friends, if you are, very close politically and socially for many years. And I think it's the very simple reason that whenever there are these political meetings and UN meetings and G7 and all of that, and the people are seated alphabetically, Israel and Italy are always next to each other. And so they got to know each other over the years. And it's a
That's funny.
testimony to the fact that how do we eradicate anti-Semitism? Well, we can do it by one by one by one by one.
Yeah.
We have a very robust anti-Semitism program in the elementary schools. I don't much do high schools anymore because it's too late. With social media being what it is, a lot of attitudes are established among the 17, 18, 19-year-olds. So
Yeah.
we work with the 11, 12, and 13-year-olds, and we teach not only about the Holocaust, but we teach about the joys of Judaism. And I bring Judaica from the synagogue and display it around the room, and let the children choose something they want to know more about. And for the most part, I'm the first and only Jewish person they've ever met. So I take my responsibility really seriously.
I see that. When I was 8 years old, I came back on the street playing with my friends, and I just have heard that I was Jewish. My mother told me that. So I spread the news. And I lived in a Catholic neighborhood in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. And the next day I heard, I cannot play with you because you guys killed Jesus. And that is
Got that
still
too.
so engraved I sometimes feel like the Holocaust studies are not helping enough to change people's mind. And I think
No.
it is more an attitude in general, respect everybody, whatever the opinion they have, as long as it's not violent. You don't create love and kindness for Jews, to say it like that, only with the Holocaust. It might shake you awake, like, oh, this is what happened, but with hate and discrimination. But if you don't like the people, it's almost like justifying, like they were XYZ bad people, and then it's okay, almost okay to do it. That's also what you see with October
Well,
7th. I mean,
I had quite an experience this year with what's called in Italy the Presepe Viventi, the living nativity scene. And the town nearby has been known for this elaborate display diorama that they do, starting with people in costumes as Roman soldiers, and then showing shops and homes as they would have been in Bethlehem, and then of course having the manger and a character local woman being Mary, and of course they had 6 babies born in the town over the years, so there was a different baby Jesus every night. And the mayor this year came by and said, we'd like to put a synagogue in the display. Wouldn't there have been a synagogue? I said, of course there would have been a synagogue. He said, would you be the rabbi of the synagogue? I said, well, I'm not authentic because there wouldn't have been women rabbis at that time, but I'm happy to do it. And at first I almost turned him down because my first concern was, how does this look? rabbi at the living nativity scene, but I thought this is a way to teach about Judaism, just like Carla, you were talking about. So we set up the synagogue, and I gave them a lot of help and brought a lot of things from our synagogue, and I did little 5-minute presentations, and I must have done several hundred of them over the week that this was open to the public. And I started out every one by saying Jesus was born, lived, and died an observant Jew.
Yeah.
And he would have had his bar mitzvah in the synagogue, and he would have had his bris in the synagogue. And people were absolutely fascinated. And I also said, you saw, and when you came in, the Roman soldiers killed Jesus and blamed it on the Jews.
Yeah.
And I felt very strongly that this message needed to get out there. And so I was glad I did it, and I'll probably do it again next year.
Oh, well done. So good that you did, because I have faced it also many times. It's a totally different story, they believe. And even though, suppose it would have been true that the Jews, that's 2000 killed Jesus. That's 2000 years ago. I mean, are we going that far back to every family has had murderers in a way, so nobody would be alive anymore. It would be so, it's a crazy way of thinking.
But
So,
also, I think that a lot of people do not know that Jesus was a Jew. And I'm fascinated by the fact that somebody can be anti-Semitic and have no idea that Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
And you know, it to me, it doesn't make sense.
Well, my grandmother used to say, may she rest in peace, he said that we didn't need research studies and and seminars to examine the roots of anti-Semitism. And she said it's jealousy. She said we start with our children at 3 years old, and we're teaching them their religion, but we're also teaching them another language. Right at the time when they want to melt into the background, that's when they stand before the congregation as a bar or bat mitzvah, giving a speech and reading from the Torah in another language, and getting debating skills from the bar and bat mitzvah preparation that they have. And my grandmother used to say any culture could do this if they wanted to. If they wanted to, they could do it.
yeah.
And she would say it's no coincidence there's so many lawyers that are Jewish, because you learn from bar mitzvah
Yeah.
preparation how to defend your point of view. And
That is so true.
I know. I remember when my daughter became bat mitzvah in Washington, D.C., and she was giving her Devar Torah, her speech, and she was talking about the fact that Moses could not enter the promised land because he had whacked the rock twice with his bastone, with his rod. And my daughter gave a short summary of the parsha, and she said, I think God overreacted. I think he was having a very bad day. Look at all the good that Moses did, and he can't go. He's looking at the promised land. That was cruel. He's looking he's looking, but he can't go. And I'm sitting there thinking, afterwards, the rabbi says, it was a very unusual perspective, and we really like it when our students think it through. I thought, oh, good. But I believe that type of learning and that type of interaction and learning and thinking process could be open to any culture if they wanted to do it.
Absolutely. And asking
Mhm.
questions and thinking things through, and not even debating, but asking questions and wondering why. That is already the beginning of a sharper mind,
Yes.
a good style. So having that said, we at the end of our interviews, we always share our anti-Semite of the week and our hero of the week. We also want to look at the positive. So maybe you would like to start, Rachel, with your anti-Semite of the week?
Well, there are so many to choose
What
from.
did you choose this time? Yeah.
I really struggled because it was such a contest, but I felt compelled to choose Zohran Mamdani, the New York State Assemblyman, who's now running to be the New York City mayor. And Cuomo is dominating in the recent polls, but this guy, Mamdani, is surging. And he's a jihadi socialist, and he's a puppet of Linda Sarsour. If you recall, she was the one from the Women's March, and big anti-Semite. And he has raised nearly $1 million to run for mayor of New York. And he's introduced pro-BDS legislation, which targets charities that support Israeli communities. He opposes the Iron Dome, which is the defense system that protects both Jewish and Arab civilians. He also established a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter to promote the anti-Semitic BDS movement. And he claims that he'd arrest Netanyahu if Netanyahu arrived in New York, despite the fact that you cannot arrest a foreign state individual, head of state. You can't do that, but that's what he claims. So he's a dangerous guy, and hopefully he does not become the mayor of New York City. So that was
Please
the
not.
way I chose.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Barbara.
Anti-Semite of the Week is a group of the Hamas supporters on the college campuses throughout the U.S., especially those in Calabria that are screaming about free speech, but are vandalizing and terrorizing Jewish students.
Okay, yeah, that's a horrible situation, and that's not disappearing quickly. Being Dutch originally, I decided to choose this week the Amsterdam University, who cut ties with the Hebrew University in Israel. 50 professors, though, gave back their papers. That was a very nice protest. But still, the phenomenon in the Netherlands is that in universities, there's a lot of anti-Israel going on. There is the Rietveld Academy. That is a very well-known art academy in the Netherlands that get international students from all over the world. And they have a doormat that you have to pass if you want to go in. And on that doormat is written, "Forbidden for Zionists. Read Jews." In the city of Amsterdam, where most of the Jews have been deported from, having in mind that 90% of the Dutch Jews have been murdered. 90% is the highest percentage from a country. So this is a new history. And the universities also have cooperated with a request from the government, definitely from the corner of Palestinians and Muslims, that wanted to have a list of all the Jewish professors, all the Israeli professors in the Netherlands university, in the Dutch universities, what membership they had, to what synagogues they do belong, what social organizations like bnei brit, and the list goes on and on. And certain universities have even given those lists with all the names. That reminded me so much how it started in the Netherlands too, how they collected the names and addresses of Jews, which made the deportation and catching Jews so easy. I find that a very, very, very upsetting news. Let's quickly go to something positive, like a hero. What is your hero this week, Rachel?
So I picked Loe al-Sharif. He is a Muslim who grew up in Saudi Arabia. He hated Israel, hated Jews, but now he's changed. He wants to educate his fellow Muslims about the value of coexistence. And when he went to study abroad, when he was a student, he was placed with a host family that was Jewish. So imagine his horror. And that was his first introduction to Jewish culture and Hebrew language. Anyway, he loved the mother of this Jewish family. He thought she was amazing. And he realized that they were good people. So it kind of changed his bias. And when he returned to Saudi Arabia, he created an educational project for Tikkun Olam, which is the Jewish concept of being obliged to improve or repair the world. And he speaks all over the place. And so I love to see it when you have a Muslim anti-Semite, anti-Zionist completely change their view. And so that's why I picked him.
Yeah, phenomenal. Rabbi Barbara.
Well, I picked Ayan Hirsi, and for probably the same reasons that Rochelle is selected her hero of the week. Growing up in a Muslim country, being a victim of FGM and female
Genital mutilation.
Genital mutilation. Yes, thank you. And learning about Jewish people from her time in the Netherlands, I believe, and with all of the wonderful writing that she has been doing as well. She's quite a spokesperson, but has had a very difficult time speaking because of the protests that are allowed to go on unrestricted, especially on college campuses. Another unsung hero is someone whose name is not known, but whose memory is we cherish. He was a partisan, and he convinced a family in the Warsaw Ghetto to allow him to smuggle out a little boy named Reuben in a potato sack and save his life, and took him to the partisans. And Reuben never knew the name of the man who smuggled him out of the ghetto, but he always spoke about him. And then I had three. Mine would be we are 8 soldiers a day who are, as I said, guarding our synagogue as we speak. Our elderly congregants often say if they weren't there, we would be afraid. And not only are they guarding us, but they are so interested to know about Judaism that because there's 2 of them on every shift, we invite one in for services and holidays and tours so that they can learn a little bit about Judaism. And it has been a wonderful relationship thus far.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, so powerful and wonderful to have that connection. That's beautiful. Well, I have chosen for this moment Hillel Neuer, that does such a great work in the UN. And this week happened that he wanted to speak and explain certain things in the UN meeting. And the Palestinian delegation asked the president to let him not speak, not finish what he was speaking. And that was honored. So Hillel Neuer had to stop talking. And he is just fighting also the situation with Francesca
Albanese,
and to get her not re-elected, to say something nicely about the Netherlands, that the Dutch government is against her being re-elected. But that is definitely a thank you to the newly situation in the government with very strong forces. Very strong voices, actually, I would say, towards defending Jews, which comes from certain parties, which I'm very grateful for. So this was it. Thank you so much, Rabbi Barbara, for being with us and with your interesting stories. Wonderful. And I wish everybody I thank everybody for watching. By the way, I forgot to say, if you like our videos, then you will help us so much by supporting us only by press the button to subscribe. Eventually, leave a like if you liked it, or leave a comment. That's even nicer. We'd love to hear from you. But please support us in our journey, or on our journey to support Israel and fight against anti-Semitism and make also Jewish things more visible. And what we heard today is definitely a great example of that. Thank you so very
Thank you.